All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Pearson Speaking About Pedagogy and Practice English Features Speaker Series. I'm Jen Edwards with the English Marketing Team, and I'm really grateful that you could join us today. I hope that you find the ideas being presented by our speaker Brenna Dugan valuable for your classroom teaching. For those of you who are new to the webinar format, I have a few quick things to point out before our session begins. If you're calling in by phone, please note that this is not a toll-free number. For that reason, we recommend that you select Use Mic and Speakers in the control bar so you can listen toll-free through your computer speakers. You may also have noticed that your line has been muted. This is to minimize background noise or any interruptions during the presentation. We encourage you to ask questions by typing in the text box marked Questions on the right-hand side of your screen in the webinar dashboard. You're welcome to ask questions at any point during the presentation, and we will answer them at the end. If your dashboard has seemed to have disappeared, hit the orange arrow and it will open back up. When you do pose a question, please make sure to include your email address and your school name. We would also like to invite you to keep up with this conversation on Twitter, and you can follow us at Pearson North AM using the hashtag PearsonLearn. Brenna Dugan has served as the Writing Center Director, Humanities Department Manager, and Instructor at a community college in Ohio. She holds a master's degree in English with a specialization in American poetry along with graduate courses in education. She has also spent several years teaching abroad. Ms. Dugan teaches composition, developmental reading, developmental writing, ESL courses, and literature. Her research includes adult literacy as well as dimensions of race, class, and gender. Brenna's presentation today is entitled, But Wait, There's More, Affective Issues Surrounding Students in Redesigned Courses. And Brenna, are you ready for us to turn it over to you?
Yep.
All right, thank you, Brenna.
Okay, so I'm just making sure you guys can all see my screen now. Is that a yes?
We can see Brenna, thanks.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I wanted to welcome everybody to the lunchtime edition of the webinar. And I wanted to talk about affective issues surrounding students. So less so the sort of educational, measurable, testing-related items, and more the emotional and social issues. So this is what we know right now, that we all already know. Our students have educational background challenges, as we know, but they also have challenges far beyond that. It goes with day-to-day sort of situations that our students run into that we see sort of either taking a toll on them or they come up to you after class and say things. We know these things, but we also know that we're not alone. We're a part of a really big community of instructors who know that these challenges are far beyond the simple sort of grade level issues. In fact, so many states are requiring these integrated and accelerated reading and writing courses. I just listened to the presentation from Tim Taylor, what he was talking about at NAID, and I just randomly ran into a good 40% of people I talk to are having their states require them to do integrated courses. In fact, 68% of the college kids on the campus are going into these courses. The students are having to play catch up, obviously, but the legislators in our states, the administrators in our college, and then us as professors, we all have to play catch up. The students need to catch up on grade levels and on their knowledge, as you know, and we also need to catch up. If we were trained as reading instructors, we have to catch up on our writing. We might feel comfortable, we know how to do it, but teaching it is just something that's a little bit less comfortable or less casual for us. And then the reverse goes for writing instructors. To be able to teach reading is a separate skill that we want to improve on rather than just being good at reading ourselves. So everyone's feeling unprepared. It's not just the instructors. It's not just the students. It's everyone. But the thing that's different for the students is that they have extra challenges that they're only just now learning how to cope with. Sometimes it comes from transportation issues. Sometimes it comes from living in a multi-generational household. In fact, you can see these statistics here. Just 37% of developmental reading students are able to catch up enough to pass into the courses that are allowing them to get credit toward their actual degree. So the question is why? And since they're from marginalized populations, oftentimes coming into these courses, they're the ones who are testing into these classes. So they are behind in academics, but also, I lost my screen forwarding button here, hold on. Life. You know, as people who have grown up in educated households or people who are very familiar with the middle class rules that are ruling our higher ed situation, we understand how to have backup plans for situations that might happen. For example, if you have to teach a class at noon and your car breaks down, you have a couple backup plans to help you get to your class on time. Our students might not necessarily have access to those kinds of things. If their ride to class is sick, they need to take the bus. Do they know the bus schedule? Do they have a smartphone to get the bus schedule? By the time they get those things all sorted out and they make it to class, they could be late. So things like this come up that we might be used to having a backup plan for where they don't have quite as sturdy as a plan. Just last week I read this article on Inside Higher Ed by Pam Whitfield, and it was called Why Teaching Developmental English Breaks My Heart. And you should look it up if you can. She said in her article, if one thing tips the scale out of balance in my students' precarious lives, I'm afraid they will disappear. So this is a very common feeling among our students. Among our instructors, we're all trying to just do what we can for these students, knowing that their home situations are really, really challenging. I mentioned the transportation issue. I mentioned the multi-generational homes. So you think, yeah, okay, so you have a grandmother, you have a mother, you have your student, and then perhaps some younger children that could be your students' children, it could be their nieces and nephews, all of them in one household, and you're like, okay, I know how that looks. But when you think about it, our student could be having to take care of his grandmother and his nephew in the same day. The student could be trying to work on his homework when his mother gets called into work to pick up an extra shift. Things like that require the student to be constantly adjusting his or her time frame and study schedule in a different way than we might have always thought about that our students would, their living situations would be like. The students also deal with learning the new rules of higher ed as far as upper middle class rules. So what I mean by this is actually a long enough explanation that books have been written about it. If you want to look into Ruby Payne, she works a lot with the rules of classes as they relate to college students. But the very brief version is that higher ed was originally based on upper middle class rules because higher education was only available to upper middle class people. And as college became more affordable, more common, it switched down to sort of middle class and upper class rules. But the idea of higher ed being run in a culture that is favorable to the working class is there's still a disconnect. So when students think that they have some sort of flexibility on deadlines, whereas the upper middle class cultural rules would not allow for that, there's a disconnect as far as what they expect the culture to be like in college compared to what it actually is like. So they need to learn those rules. And as their instructors, we should be aware of the fact that they might need to do a little catching up on that. They also have challenges staying engaged in their class. One of the articles I read, which I will hopefully be able to link out to you guys later, is that students, before they start kindergarten, they are behind in their vocabulary to such an extent that, excuse me, they're behind to such an extent that they often have a hard time in understanding their teacher, so their kindergarten teacher. And they start tuning out. They start getting distracted more easily, and this is partly to do with their challenges at sort of just integrating themselves in the classroom. So if that starts before kindergarten, and then they go through 12 years of school with this vocabulary deficit, even if their vocabulary improves at the same rate as anybody else in their classroom, they're still going to be behind as a result of that. As it shows up in adulthood, is that the students are still having a hard time staying engaged in class. They're still behind with their vocabulary challenges, and that leads to stress and depression. The study on that comes from the CCRC. They also have a lack of sense of belonging in college, partly due to the cultural aspects that I mentioned. So what can we do? You might have heard of the researcher Mike Rose. He does a lot of work in education. He is asking us to reframe the way that we look at our developmental students. He has a quote, Mike Rose has a quote in another Inside Higher Ed article. He says this: "We don't get much of a sense of the texture of students' lives, the terrible economic instability of some of them. But we get even less of a sense of the power of learning new things, and through that learning, redefining who you are. Profiles of students in remedial classes, when we do get them, are too often profiles of failure rather than people with dynamic mental lives." So I wanted to focus on the word redefining, and I'll pick that up in a little bit. And the other phrase he writes is dynamic mental lives. So what does a dynamic mental life look like? If you think of the word dynamic, it's the opposite of the word static. So let's think for a minute in extremes as far as a static life. So you might remember those cartoons from the early 80s. A man would walk out of his house with a briefcase, walk to his car, drive the car to work, drive the car back home, open the door back to his house, walk to his bed, sleep, wake up, go out the door, go to his car, drive to work, come back, sleep, and so on. So it was a sort of repetitive scene that they often played in the cartoons. And that makes you think of a static life. But we all know that life is not actually like that. In a dynamic mental life, this is the most busiest situation you can imagine going on in your life, but mentally. So it's causing a lack of optimism. When students feel that they're on a constantly changing cycle where they are constantly adjusting to new scenarios while they're doing their homework, the result is a lack of optimism. They don't have a sense of getting off this sort of hamster wheel in their dynamic mental life. The disruptive life challenges sometimes are so disruptive that it causes them to stop out of their courses. And finally, needing sudden access to resources with few chances to plan ahead. So as I mentioned with the transportation problem, does the student have enough money to catch the bus? Does the student have access to the resource to find the bus schedule? Does the student have a babysitter now who, when his original babysitter ran into the same problem with transportation? So what can you do in your classroom? When you know that students often go through these challenges, end up with a sort of I give up attitude and sort of wanting to toss up their hands, whether it comes from vocabulary issues, whether it comes from cultural issues, whether it comes from having a bad day with one of the people in his household, they often want to give up. But if you take a picture of your students' mindsets regularly, you can talk to them about their doubts and fears. Now, you might say, well, it's hard to use up class time to do that. I'm not sure that the student wants to tell me their life situation before or after class. But we have instructors on our campus here who started a thing where at the beginning of the semester they send one email to each student separately talking about something that's going on in the instructor's lives, and then ask the student to respond with something that's going on in his or her life. So this is a way to check in with your student, get a little snapshot of your student's mindset right away at the start of the semester, but also it's an immediate way to open the line of communication between you and your student. Things like that just make it possible for the student to be able to contact you later if something comes up. Another thing we need to do is admit that we're human too. I know professors, myself included, try to uphold a certain politically safe, sort of neutral demeanor for, protecting our professionalism and everything. But at times, it really draws in students, and I'm sure some of you have tried it randomly if you had a bad day even and you let it slip that you, for example, lost your ticket on the way to the turnpike like I did the other day. That happens. Just admit that you're human too, and it makes the environment more comfortable for the students. Another thing that you can do is be hypothetical. If you, for example, lose your ticket on the way to the turnpike, and you come into class, and you handled it, you figured out what you need to do, bring the hypothetical situation to your students. If it happened to you, what would you do? And that helps them have a bit of a mindset in which if they did run into a similar situation, they might have a little more basis knowing that someone who they look up to, as in their instructors, were able to handle a similar situation. Or if you're having trouble with your kids, if your daycare director opens the door late and it makes you late for work or anything like this, you can bring those up in class and have your students not only know that you're human, but also know that this situation has been dealt with before by somebody who I respect, and this is what they did, so maybe I'll try that. That's a way to help the students feel more comfortable in your class, but also just functioning in this new culture that they're learning. And finally, being dramatic is a simple way just to get engagement in your classroom. If you find your students distracted, kind of having that I give up appearance, being dramatic, asking them to over-dramatize or over-exaggerate things that might be going on might help them just sort of relax and see that they're gonna be okay. The last step of changes that we can make in our classroom to help the students with their affective problems is not the witness protection program. It's actually that we need to give students a new identity. So if we have a sort of early alert system or something like that at our schools and we want to request an intervention, why don't we call these situations with the advisors, interventions with your mentors, or have a meeting with your mentor? The same goes with the tutoring centers that you could be sending your students to. Why wouldn't you tell them that they're entering a community of scholars? For what reason would you tell the students that they need extra help when you could also tell them that why don't you join a study group? So sort of talk to the students in a way that they're level or equal with other people who have more knowledge than them perhaps, but who are in other ways just equally human, equally a mentor who could help them. So, in summary, we're not alone in our challenges. We all have these challenges, and sometimes they get overwhelming with the sake of patience or other things that might be required of teaching these students. We forget that there's other people fighting the same good fight. So let's remember that we're not alone. Let's also remember that our students have complicated daily lives, just daily continual lives, but also dynamic mental lives. So in their own minds, they're constantly needing to change and readjust and focus on their priorities. And that we can break through all of these by understanding the students' attitudes, allowing them to share a little bit of their lives, showing them that we're human too, and also giving the students a new identity and thinking a little more about how we present the resources to them. So this is my contact information. I would really, really love if you emailed me because I have a list of more readings that I can send you that expand on what I presented to you. And I also have my own created list of prompts that you can use for journals, emails, in-class writing assignments that kind of help students sort out the affective issues that I mentioned. So I have prompts that you could use at the start of the semester, mid-semester, and then again at the end of the semester. They have hypothetical situations. They have personal touch type situations. And so if you email me, I will send you that list of prompts. And I'm finished. Thank you so much for listening. And I wonder, Jen, if anybody has any questions.
Not at this point, but we'll take any attendee questions. At this point, please feel free to enter them into the question box, and we will pose those to Brenna. Brenna, while we're waiting for those to come in, I did have a quick question. Since some of the instructors at your institution have begun sharing a little bit more about their own lives and reaching out to students on a personal level, have you seen any changes in retention or student performance due to that?
Actually, yeah, the one instructor I'm thinking of offhand who sort of started it on her own and passed it on to other instructors, she has higher retention than anybody else in the department. So it's a huge issue. And not only that, but just to have like more comfort with your students and to know that your students are comfortable is such a big asset as far as the rapport building and group building that you do in your classes every day anyway.
Excellent. We'll give a couple more minutes for questions to come in. Brenna, do you want to share any of the prompts that you personally have used recently in class and any outcomes from those?
Sure. Let me tell you what I do at the end of the semester since we're coming up on the end of the semester here. I either do prompts or in-class writings or emails, actually. One of the questions I ask is, if you could write your own future, what would you like it to be and how would you make it happen? Another one is, now that your course is almost finished, discuss the ways that our group interactions have helped your studies, and were there any negative effects? And the last one is, name one way of thinking and one habit that has changed for you since we began this class. So part of the purpose of these questions is just to have students be more reflective on what they actually have gained in a sort of social and cultural way from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester.
Excellent. Brenna, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go ahead and end your presentation today?
Nope. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Everybody, Brenna's information is up here on the screen. We will also be sending follow-up information, Brenna's presentation, as well as any research or works cited and handouts that she may have will also be posted on our Pearson Pedagogy and Practice site. I encourage you all to check that out, and our previous presenters will also be available on that site as well. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back here at the 1 o'clock Eastern Time hour for our next presenter, Kim Blockman. Thank you so much, Brenna. We appreciate all your work and your insight.
Thanks, everyone.